Hello everyone, it's Tricia Joiner again, and I want to tell you about the brushes that I use for the Zhostovo painting. I think an explanation for why I use sable and how we came about this little collection of brushes will be helpful in your understanding the painting. When I started 25 years ago, I used the brushes made by Yarka that are sable, Siberian Kolinsky sable brushes that we got from Russia. And in fact, in my first trip to Russia with a group of painters that we had a class over there in Moscow with, they told me they didn't have brushes they could buy, that if I wanted something to paint with, I was going to have to find them over here in the US and bring them. So I looked around and I did find these brushes that were called Yarka, and they said on the brush that they were made in Russia. So I thought, well, okay, they're made in Russia, they must be okay. And I bought a collection of them and I carried them to Moscow for our class. And lo and behold, they're the brushes that were used in the Zhostovo factory. Except in the factory, they painted with squirrel instead of sable because the squirrel works in oils and it's much less expensive. So here I am buying brushes in America to carry to Russia for the students to use in a class because they were not available to purchase anywhere except in the factory, provided to the factory workers. So I found that very interesting that there we were. There are a lot of things you can't get over there that you can now. But anyway, in the passing years, what has happened is the company that was formed to try to put together a business that made these brushes for sale in the US went out of business. And the brushes went way downhill. The brushes that were used for painting in the factory went way downhill, and Slava has told me he won't even give them to his grandchildren to play with because they're so bad. So I spent a lot of time looking around trying to find out what we could use in this country to replace the Yarka sables. And needless to say, I have a collection. I'll show you right over here. This is just a small part of my collection. These are the bigger brushes, and sometimes when a brush gets tired, I dig around in here and pull out one that seems to feel like working better that day. But I have enough of these Yarka brushes to last me the rest of my life. And the other thing I want to point out is that in carrying brushes around, and pull out my brush holder here, in carrying brushes around to paint in seminars and so forth, this is what I use, this little holder, missing on this side of the brushes that I've got out on the palette to show you, but this little holder of brushes, it has been what I've used to paint on everything for 25 years. I paint on glass, I paint on fabric, I paint Zhostovo style on any surface you want to hand me, whatever it is. I've painted on clothing. Whatever it is, these brushes have worked. So I don't have an enormous collection of all kinds of brushes. And I realize that brushes for each individual technique can sometimes, like mine, be helpful to have something special. But in Russia, they only had round brushes. And the round brushes were used for liner brushes in place of a flat. There were no flat brushes. You didn't get flat brushes over there. So the round brush had to do everything. And when you lay out one of these brushes, it should not have a point. That was my first problem. A lot of good round brushes come to a point in the center, and then when you're trying to base something in, you're dealing with that point everywhere you go, getting in your way. So that had to be conquered. And the filbert was the next thing. It is the most critical brush in the whole technique. This is a Yarka. This is a Sharf Aqua Flow that I have found. It's used for watercolors, but it's perfect for what we need, for softening the edges of glazes. So Mostly what I had trouble with is the brushes plumped up, and then they didn't stay down to their nice rounded tip. The reason for using a filbert for softening colors and laying on water is because it holds its shape without any paint in it. So if I just have water in this brush, it will still stay in this position. Whereas a round brush wants to come back to its point. If you don't have paint in it, it's hard to keep it flattened out. You have to keep wiggling it around to get it to stay flattened out. So the filbert comes in handy. I don't paint with the filbert. The filbert never has paint on it. The round brush is what you paint with, and liner brushes. So there's the filberts. This wonderful filbert you just can't live without in this technique. And next I'll go to the liner brushes here and pull out, because this is really a fun story anyway. In the beginning, we had no liner brushes because they didn't make them in the Yarka factory. What they did is they took number 5 rounds and a razor blade and cut all the hair off around the outside edge. And of course, you know, that sounds horrible because you're throwing away all that sable. But the truth is that the center part of the brush is the best part of the brush. It comes to the nicest point. It's got the best hairs in it. So for liner work, that using just that middle part, and it's a long, that's why they use the number 5. It's a long brush, so when you load it back here and it feeds the point. You can paint a whole alphabet with one loading of the brush. So this is wonderful. And in classes, when we were doing seminars, Slava would take his razor blade out and he would cut these liners for people that were in the seminar. But we couldn't do that for everybody. So we had to come up with another plan. And we did actually get Yarka to make, where's my Yarka? Yeah. To make a liner brush. The problem with it is, put some water in it so you can see it. When you pull a long liner brush together like this with long hairs, you have to crimp down the ferrule to hold it all in. Whereas this one, that wasn't the case. If you lose hair around the outside edge, you don't care. The center hair stays together because the outside edge hairs hold it in place. So for the Russian painters, this was a wonderful thing. They had a liner and they made their own. Needless to say, I have several of them. Again, enough to last me a lifetime, I hope. This one is Yarka. It's still a sable brush and it still works fairly well, but it is not available anymore. So what I have found is I just love this little 5/0 black gold by Dynasty, because it's so small. When people are learning to do the liner work, the details and the borders and so forth, they can't overload it. It's so tiny that it works really well. But as you progress, this is a wonderful brush because it has the long liner part at the tip and this reservoir back here. But you have to understand what you're doing and know how to load it for this one to work. So it takes a little bit more of an experienced painter, and it might be what you want to move into as you progress in your painting. So there's the liner brushes and the filbert brushes. Now to the round brushes. As I said, they don't have flat brushes. They didn't have flat brushes, so the round brush has to have a nice flat look to it when you flatten it out with paint in it. And a new brush is sometimes a little bit of a problem because the hairs on the end are not perfectly smooth. I don't know if this shows up well enough. Let me find something else here that will demonstrate that. But it's not a problem. You can see this hair is a little rougher. I use my newer brushes that have the hairs that are like that as a base coating brush because those little hairs wear off as you use it on brushing over and over on something that's rough, and eventually you'll have this look to your brush. So I'm going to put a little paint on it over here and show you that I can make a very tiny line. It's like any other good round brush. I can make a very tiny line. I can make a beautiful comma stroke because it forms a nice rounded head and a good tail. I can do an S stroke with a thin start and a fat body and back to a thin. So any stroke that you want to do, you can do with this brush. And also base coat. The base coating, because it flattens out, it's smooth, it makes a nice even base coat. So it works well for as a flat brush or as a round brush. And it holds the paint and water differently than a synthetic brush. It's very soft. It holds a lot of moisture because the sable holds a lot of moisture. And you can paint with it for a very long time without needing to rinse it out and start over. The paint doesn't dry. And the other advantage to it is if you put the brush down and you walk away and you come back with a synthetic brush, you're working real hard to get that paint out of there. You might have to soak it in something to get the paint to dissolve. In these sable brushes, that doesn't happen. It's like your hair. When you rinse it out, even if the paint is dried in there, it'll come moisten up and come right off. It does not bond to the fibers the way acrylic paint does to a synthetic brush. So it has that advantage. You can use it for a very long time to base paint. So if you've brush missed a color and you're painting something, you don't have to go back and rinse out and start over. You just add a little moisture to it and keep on going. And I can pick this up and demonstrate. I'm adding a little paint to my brush here. I paint sideways to the table, not straight on with this flat underneath the light. I paint sideways because you should always be pulling your strokes towards yourself, not pushing them away, because you can't see what's going on behind that brush. So to paint a daisy, freehand daisy, you start in the center front, and you've got your first little comma stroke going on in there, and then you work around, and the shape is oval, and you are aiming towards this point that would be at the bottom of the center. So you're working your way around with those strokes close together. Get longer on the side because they need to reach that point. You come all the way around, and as you get to the back of the flower, your strokes straighten out again, because what are you doing? You're aiming. You're aiming your strokes towards that point right there at the bottom of the center. Then you go back and turn it around and paint the other half. So now I'm aiming the same way. I'm going to get a nice little curve there, a little bit longer as I come to the side because I need the strokes to reach to that center point, and the shape is oval. And as I get around to the back side, I'm straightening the strokes out again because I'm pulling into that point there. And on the back side, they're going to be a little shorter because they're disappearing. So there you have it, one loading of this brush. Nicely rounded strokes all the way around. I haven't rinsed out. I would let this dry and paint it a second time if I was looking for solid opaque paint. But here I'm just demonstrating what this brush will do. So that's your round brush, and you can paint all the different shapes of flower forms and base paint and do liner work. I can put a stem line in here without any trouble. There you go. If I wanted a leaf, I can do that too. Still with the same brush loading. And I'll be going more into the technique for this Zhostovo painting. I've just started a YouTube channel. Getting to do this online teaching through a Zoom class has really forced me into learning a whole lot of new things, which I am thoroughly enjoying. And it's also going to give me the ability to share with students around the world the traditional painting of Zhostovo painting style that I learned from Slava, and I believe that I owe him trying to keep this as just as a traditional as possible. And I know there's as many different forms of how to paint a rose as there are painters in Zhostovo, and so there are lots of different varieties of how this painting is done in this country too. But I'm trying to promote being classical and traditional as much as I can. So I hope this answers some of the questions about the brushes. We have moved to these round brushes that are Kolinsky Sable that Dynasty makes, and they're a relatively good substitute. The best one I have found in years of looking. So that's what you'll find on my website. And I hope this helps you understand why you need the sable brushes, why you need the filbert brush. People think you paint with it. It's not. It's used for softening glazes, so you can transition from the color you're putting on back to the base color without having a transition line. Hopefully you'll join me in a class sometime soon and learn more about the painting and the brushes. Thank you for watching.